Good morning, good afternoon, good night, students. I hope you are ready for this flipped classroom. First of all, have the worksheet that you are given in class ready. Along with it, have your stationery. Do you have them by your side now? Okay, let's start. Let's do a quick recap on what we have learned for cells in the last lesson. Do you remember what living things are made up of? Living things are made up of cells. And we have also looked at some examples of cells and how different they all look. Cells are the building blocks of living things. All living things are made up of cells. How many cells are you made up of? A cell is a basic unit of life. It is able to carry out life processes. Life processes are things like respiration, digestion, we have also looked at unicellular organisms. Do you know what unicellular means? Well, it means made up of only one cell. Do you remember the examples that we were shown? Okay, let's look at them again. There are three types that we learned: the bacteria, the yeast, and the paramecium. And they are so small that we need a microscope to see them. For this flipped classroom, by the end of the lesson, you should be able to identify the different parts of a typical plant cell and a typical animal cell. And also to relate the cell parts to their functions. First of all, let's look at animal cells. When seen under the microscope, these are what some of them look like. The various colors are due to dyeing. We put some color dye on the cells so that you are able to see them clearly under the microscope. So if you use a color dye of green, it will appear green. If you use blue, it will appear blue. Do you see any similarities between these cells? You may think that based on the previous cell under the microscope that cells are flat, but they are not flat. This one shows the three-dimensional model of a cell. A cell, just like you, has length, breadth, and height. Let's look at what is inside the cell. Well, some of the parts are stated there. Let's see the cross-section view. Do you see that there are many cell parts? Just like you have many body parts, a cell in itself has very small parts. But our objective is not to learn every single one of them. For primary school, we'll focus on only 3 parts. So let's look at what the 3 parts are. In the simplified version, you are going to learn the cell nucleus, the cell cytoplasm, and the cell membrane. Now that you have learned the parts, let's look at what each part does for the cell. So this is the function. The nucleus controls all activities that take place inside the cell. Can you relate what this is like to yourself? Is the nucleus more like your brain, or is it more like your hands? The nucleus also contains information which is passed from one generation to another. I'm sure you have heard of the term DNA. Well, DNA is a genetic code and it is found inside the nucleus. Next one, the cytoplasm. Cytoplasm actually fills up the cell and it contains many cell parts that performs different functions. Remember in the last diagram, the cross section, we see that there are many cell parts, and all these cell parts are inside the cytoplasm. Okay, let's go back to the tree that we're learning. And the cell membrane. Cell membrane controls the movement of materials in and out of the cell. This is a picture of a chick cell seen under the microscope. Let's see if you are able to identify the cell parts. Test yourself. Do you remember what this is? This is the nucleus. Next one. Cytoplasm. And the last one. This is the cell membrane. Did you get all three correct? Give yourself a pat on the shoulder if you have. First task. Refer to your worksheet. The first box labeled as box A, you are to draw the simplified typical animal cell. After drawing, using pencil, label the cell parts. Well, you only need to label the three that we are learning. After you have labeled them, state the functions of these three parts. You may write the functions under the labels or draw a table to write it down. So this is your first task for the worksheet. Next, let's move on to the plant cells. These are some examples of plant cells seen under the microscope. Again, you will see that they are blue and some are purplish. But remember, these are just the color dye. Do you see any similarities between them? Have you noticed the green color parts? Could you make a guess what they are? Okay, this is the 3D model of a plant cell. Again, you will see that the cell, a tiny cell that you can only see under the microscope, is made up of many even smaller parts. Are you required to learn everything over here? Luckily for you, no. This is the cross section. And this is the cross section of the simplified typical plant cell. And this what we are going to learn, these 5 parts. Let's go through them now. Over here we have the nucleus. And this is a cell membrane. Next, the cytoplasm, the cell wall, and the chloroplast. Do you remember the green color things that we saw just now? Do you know what they are now? Let's learn about what each of these cell parts does for the cell. The nucleus controls all activities that happens inside the cell. It contains information that is passed from one generation to the next. The cytoplasm is jelly-like and contains many other cell parts which perform different functions. The cell membrane is a thin layer which controls the movements of materials in and out of the cell. The chloroplast, the green color discs, they contain a green pigment called chlorophyll. Have you heard of chlorophyll? Chlorophyll traps sunlight so that the plants can use the light to make food during photosynthesis. The last part they will learn is the cell wall. The cell wall supports and gives the cell a regular shape. Do you find any familiar cell parts over here? Have you heard of some of these? Well, this is a cell, plant cell under the microscope. Over here, you can see that this is the nucleus. Can you recall the function of the nucleus? The green color ones are quite easy to you now, and they are the chloroplasts. What does a chloroplast do? And there's a cell wall. Do you know where the cytoplasm is? Sometimes it is not very clear from this microscope. We need to adjust them to see other views of it. Your next task. Under box A, you will find box B. Draw the simplified typical cell of the plant using pencil. Then you will label the cell parts. Do you know which cell parts you're supposed to label? After that, state the functions. Just like the animal cell, you may choose to write the functions under the cell parts themselves or draw a table to write it in. Next, your last quiz. Turn the page over, you will find task 1C. So, write your answer in box C. Over here, you will find a plant cell and an animal cell. This is a plant cell. How do we know that this is a plant cell? Does it look familiar to you? And how do you know that this is the animal cell? The cell parts of both cells have been labeled A to H. Identify what each part is and write your answers in box C. You only need to write the cell part and not the functions. So test yourself. If you cannot remember, refer to the earlier video, or you may refer to your textbook. After you have done these 3 activities, you must be able to identify the different parts of a typical plant cell and animal cell, and also to relate the cell parts to their functions. If you still are unable to remember these 2 things, please revise using a textbook or this video before you come to class. You must be able to do these 2 things. So for the next science lesson, bring this worksheet. Okay, if you have any questions, bring them up in class and I'll see you. Goodbye.